Lunchtime news here on TV1. For the Newsfirst team, where the people come first, I'm Sanita Senanayaka. Before we take a look at the stories that we've got for you this afternoon in detail, let's take a look at the headlines.
Sri Lankans overseas demand elections be held. Finance Ministry Secretary, IGP and government printer summoned to Election Commission tomorrow. State Minister of Finance explains who will benefit from tax policy. Professionals to decide on action against government's tax policy. Several train operations cancelled owing to shortage of employees.
On to top story. The Secretary to the Ministry of Finance, the Inspector General of Police and the government printer have once again been summoned to the Election Commission tomorrow.
The Commission said matters regarding the holding of the election will be discussed with the officials. Meanwhile, all opposition parties have written to the Election Commission demanding them to conduct the local government polls on the 19th of March. The group had requested a meeting with the Election Commission at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Meanwhile, the Election Commission announced it will discuss further with the relevant institutions, including the Ministry of Finance, and announce its decision on the date of the local government election before Thursday, as per the order issued by the Supreme Court.
As it was mentioned in the headlines, Sri Lankans living overseas engaged in protests today, demanding the local government election be held. A group of Sri Lankans in Italy engaged in a protest. They pointed out that democracy cannot be disrupted by postponing the local government polls.
අපි දන්නවා රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහ නැත්නම් රනිල් රාජපක්ෂ අද මේක පුට්ටුවක් ඒ කියන්නේ ලංකාවේ ඉන්න අති දුෂ්ට අති දූෂිත නරකම පන්නේ දේශපාලන කල්ලිය එක රොත්තට එකට එකතු වෙලා රටේ ජනතාවගේ මෙන්න මේ ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදී මූලික අයිතිය පැහැරගෙන තියෙනවා මේ වෙලාවේ. මේ අරගලයේ තේමාව තමයි මැතිවරණ අයිතිය ලබා ගැනීම.
A group of Sri Lankans in Melbourne, Australia engaged in a protest yesterday. They demanded Sri Lankan authorities to hold the elections.
එහෙම කරේ නැත්නම් එදා රාජපක්ෂලට නේවි කෑම් පස්සේ දූපත් රස්සේ හැංගිලා තමයි ඉන්න උනේ හැබැයි උඹට දුවන්න වෙන දවසට උඹට දුවන්න තැන් නැති වෙයි කියන එක අපි අද මේ මෙල්බන් නුවර ඉඳන් රනිල් වික්‍රමසිංහට මතක් කරලා දෙනවා.
The Frontline Socialist Party says if the government is not willing to hold the election, it must be won through a struggle.
They remain in power by trapping the people, even after having obtained power without a mandate. This is how these rulers who preach about democracy think. We, the Frontline Socialist Party, say that there is only one way of getting an election. That is through people stepping out to the streets and demanding elections. We are not willing to stand aside while you rule this country however you wish. The rulers can't bully the people like this. Convening a media briefing in Colombo today, the Freedom People's Alliance explained the reason behind the government's attempt to postpone the election.
ලෝකයේ කිසිම ප්‍රජාතන්ත්‍රවාදී රටක
No one in a democratic country can argue that elections will only be held if there are enough funds. If that logic is proven right, apart from local government elections, not a single election can be held as per the law. The presidential election and the general election will not be held legally. The elections are being held as there are no other options. It is clear to everyone that they are doing this with resistance. Why is there a resistance? Technical research clearly shows that both the UNP and the SLPP does not even have 10% of the support of the population. That percentage will drop even more. Once the results are out, it will show that both of these factions will only have the support of about 8% of the population.
ජනතාවගේ අනුමැතිය තියෙන්නේ 8% පමණ මට්ටමේ කියා.
ඔබතුමාට මේ පක්ෂේ අමුතුරත් අහිමි වෙන්න නේද යන්නේ ඒකත් ඔබතුමා ඉවත් කරනවා කියලා.
මම දන්නේ නැහැ. ඔබතුමාලා මට කියන්නේ. මම පත්තරේ බලනවා පත්තරේ දිනනවා.
I don't know. You tell me. I look at the papers and I saw this. I see it on television, but I haven't received a letter. If I am being removed, I must be informed. Why aren't they sending me that letter? If they can tell it to the media, why aren't they sending the letter to me? This shows the nature of the SLPP. Instead of the person who should be informed, they seem to be informing everyone else.
දැනගතු පුද්ගලයා ආරෙන්න අනිත් හැමෝටම කියනවා.
News First with the people.
In more local news, State Minister of Finance Ranjit expressed the following views regarding the government's tax policy.
අපි ලොකු ආර්ථික ආඝාතයකට ඉන්නේ. එතකොට අපිට ඒ තත්ත්වය උදා වෙන්න එක ප්‍රධාන හේතුවක් වුණා අපි විසින්ම අපේ බදු අඩු.
Today we're facing an economic crisis. One reason is the cancellation of tax income. Income taxes were present in 2019. 1.5 million tax documents were made invalid after those taxes were cancelled. That is what we are trying to impose again. But due to the difficulties faced by the people, we have eased certain limitations. There are 4.6 million people working in the state, non-state and private sectors. Of that, around 120,000 people are earning more than 100,000 rupees per month. 43% of 120,000 are earning 100,000 to 140,000 rupees. Therefore, a person who earns 150,000 rupees will have to pay less than 3,000 rupees per month. What is the government doing with this income? We are planning on providing 10 kilograms of rice each for 2.8 million families. If there are 4 family members, we will be distributing rice to 11.2 million. Over half the population will receive this aid. Those people don't have a voice. They are helpless. What will happen if the people who are barely getting to let out the frustration? We want to inform all the educated people of the country. We understand that this is difficult. It is not easy to pay this income tax for 120,000 rupees, but we ask the educated community of this country, can we neglect the marginalized people of the country?
යුතුයකමක් රටක් හැටියට තියනවා නේද කියන පණිවිඩය තමයි ඔබතුමාලා හරහා මේ උගත් බුද්ධිමත් ප්‍රජාවට අපිට දෙන්න තියෙන්නේ.
Meanwhile, the Professionals Trade Union Collective says a decisive meeting will be held tomorrow to discuss action against the government's new tax policy.
මේ ආණ්ඩුව අසාධාරණ බදු ප්‍රතිපත්තියට එරෙහි සටන මේ සතියේ තීරණාත්මක අධ්‍යයනයකට පැමිණෙනවා.
We are at a decisive juncture when it comes to the opposition mounted against the government's unjust tax policy. To decide what decision will be taken, more than 40 trade unions attached to the Professionals Trade Union Collective will convene at the GMOA office tomorrow. A final decision as to what steps will be taken in the future after the 9th of March will be made during that meeting.
මාර්ගවලට යන්නේ මොන වගේ කාලරාමුවකටද මේ කටයුතු ගමන් කරන්නේ කියන කාරණේ සම්බන්ධයෙන් අවසන් තීරණයක් ගැනීමත් නියමිතයි.
The Government Teachers Association of Sri Lanka has expressed concerns over the retirement of teachers and the prevailing crisis within the school education system.
12 වෙනි මාස 31 2022 ගුරුවරු 13000ක් විශ්‍රාම යාමට කටයුතු කළා. ඒ විශ්‍රාම යාම නිසා පද්ධතිය පවත්වාගෙන යාමේ
By the 31st of December 2022, 13,000 teachers decided to retire. This has created an issue within the education system. Even though teaching science diploma exams have concluded, diploma holders are yet to receive their results. The Education Ministry shouldn't be playing with the lives of unemployed teaching science diploma holders. They should take steps to release the final results and recruit the 8,000 diploma holders by the 27th of March. If not, the entire school system will collapse.
මේ සියලු පත්වීම් 8000ක පත්වීම් ප්‍රමාණය ලබා දීමට කටයුතු කළ යුතුයි. එසේ නොවුනොත් පාසල් පද්ධතිය අනිවාර්යෙන්ම බිඳ වැටෙනවාමයි මේ පවත්වාගෙන යන්න බෑ.
After over 20 years, the United Nations has agreed upon the text of the historic High Seas Treaty, the world's first international treaty aimed at protecting millions of species that inhabit the world's oceans. State Minister of Foreign Affairs Taraka Balasuriya says that Sri Lanka actively participated and contributed to the process.
After more than 20 years of negotiations, over 100 member states of the United Nations on Saturday finally agreed upon the text of the historic High Seas Treaty, the world's first international treaty aimed at protecting the millions of species that inhabit the world's oceans. The High Seas Treaty places 30% of the seas into protected areas by 2030, aiming to safeguard and recuperate marine nature. The agreement was reached on Saturday evening after 38 hours of talks at the UN headquarters in New York. The negotiations had been held up for years over disagreements on funding and fishing rights. The last international agreement on ocean prevention was signed 40 years ago in 1982, the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. When Newsfirst reached out to State Minister of Foreign Affairs Apala in this regard, he said that, quote, Sri Lanka actively participated and contributed to the process, unquote. He added, quote, an agreement was reached following more than a decade of discussions on the 4th of March 2023 by UN member states to have an internationally legally binding instrument on the conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity beyond areas of natural jurisdiction under the United Nations Law of the Sea, unquote. That agreement established an area called the High Seas International Waters where all countries have a right to fish, ship and do research, but only 1.2% of these waters are protected. Marine life living outside of these protected areas have been at risk from climate change, overfishing and shipping traffic.
Meanwhile, State Minister of Foreign Affairs Apala was amongst the dignitaries present for the 5th United Nations Conference on the Least Developed Countries taking place in Doha, Qatar. The event is being held from the 5th to the 9th of this month.
State Minister Apala met with counterpart Sultan bin Saad Al Muraiki, the Minister of State for Foreign Affairs in Qatar, for a discussion that touched upon many areas, including the recognition of the Sri Lankan engineering degrees by Qatari authorities and Sri Lanka's technical support for Qatari government's attempt to promote cricket in Qatar. Apala also expressed Sri Lanka's unwavering support for the Palestinian cause and its people to the President of the State of Palestine, Mahmoud Abbas. With ongoing progressions and developments on the new establishment of the Office of Overseas Sri Lankans, the State Minister held side meetings with His Excellency Antonio Vitorino, Director of IOM in Doha, in which His Excellency Vitorino assured IOM support on the digitalization of the Office of Overseas Sri Lankans, as well as continuous support of the IOM with matters pertaining to migration. State Minister Balasuri also met with the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs in Italy, and discussions were held particularly on bilateral relations between the respective countries. They had thanked the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Italy for including Sri Lanka in the Flow Decree program, which aims for the recruitment of migrant workers to Italy from non-EU countries.
Buddhists across the country mark the Madin full moon Poya day today. According to Buddhist scripture, it was on the Madin full moon Poya day, the Enlightened One, along with a retinue of about 20,000 disciples, trekked to Kimbulwatpura to meet King Suddhodana.
Buddhists in Sri Lanka consider Madin Poya as Siripa Poya, while many refer to this day as when Buddhists were taught the virtue of gratitude. It is said King Suddhodana was afflicted with a great desire to see Gautama Buddha and dispatched emissaries after emissaries under the leadership of his ministers, pleading with the Buddha to visit Kimbulwatpura. These groups of emissaries, however, did not return, having become disciples of the Buddha. According to the Buddhist chronicles, the king then dispatched his minister Kaludai to invite the Buddha, but he too became a disciple of the Buddha. However, the Buddha had accepted the invitation and made a visit to Kimbulwatpura. In order to counter the pride of the Sakya clan, Buddha rose up to the sky and displayed a twinfold miracle, Yamamaha Pelahara. Buddhists across the country visited temples today and engaged in religious observances. The 26th Dhamma sermon of the Sri Sandaham Setha Dhamma sermon program held at the office of the opposition leader in Colombo, which is held on every Poya day, took place today as well. The sermon was conducted by Shastrapati Venerable Tihakoda Bhattiya Thero. Meanwhile, a Buddha Puja was held at the Shakya Malakya opposite the Capital Maharaja Group head office this morning. The puja was organized by the staff of A.F. Jones, a subsidiary of the Capital Maharaja Group.
Several trains have been cancelled following the absence of train drivers.
According to the Railway Department, trains moving from Fort to Batiklo, Puttalam, Kalutara are among the trains that have been cancelled. The department further said that even though they have sought approval to recruit drivers on a contract basis, the Public Service Commission has still not responded to their request.
Harvesting of crops.
Farmers able to get a proper harvest for the past few seasons owing to various reasons such as the fertilizer and fuel crises. Farmers now say harvest levels have dropped with the emergence of the yellowing of crops.
Harvesting of crops in Nuwarawewa, Anuradhapura has begun. Farmers say the harvest levels have dropped significantly. They say this is primarily due to the yellowing of crops. Not getting a proper price for their produce is another issue that has affected these farmers.
Apart from paddy farmers, maize farmers continue to express concerns over not getting a reasonable value for their harvest. Maize farmers in Hirulagama, however, have cultivated maize in over 50 acres of land during the Maha season. But since there is no reasonable value for their harvest, the farmers continue to stock their harvest at home. During the previous Maha season, a kilo of maize was sold at 250 rupees, but this time around farmers claim that private merchants are buying a kilo of raw maize at 90 rupees, while the cost of a kilo of dry maize is 120 rupees.
In international news, thousands of refugees are left homeless following a massive fire that broke out in a crowded Rohingya refugee camp in Bangladesh.
Around 12,000 Rohingya refugees have been left homeless following a massive fire that broke out in a crowded Rohingya refugee camp in southeastern Bangladesh on Sunday. The fire had destroyed some 2,000 shelters in the camp. In addition, at least 35 mosques and 21 learning centers which have been set up for the refugees. However, the cause of the fire is not yet known and no casualties have been reported so far.
The United Kingdom government has imposed a lifetime ban on illegal migrants crossing the English Channel.
Mr. Speaker, I said enough is enough, and I mean it. And that means I am prepared to do what must be done.
According to the new regulation, Channel migrants will be removed from the UK, banned from future re-entry and will be unable to apply for British citizenship. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has made it a top priority to stop boats going into the UK, and the slew of proposed measures will apply to anyone arriving on UK shores in a small boat. Even though asylum seekers coming to the UK have the right to seek protection under the UN's Refugee Convention and the European Convention on Human Rights, a clause in the Illegal Migration Bill is expected to effectively allow the conventions to be circumvented. Record numbers of asylum seekers have made the dangerous crossing from France to the UK in 2022, and the government has long been trying to tackle the rise in the number of illegal migrants.
And once removed, you should have no right to re-entry, settlement or citizenship.
The greatest mixed martial artist of all times, Jon Jones, stormed back from a 3-year layoff to submit France's Cyril Gane with a guillotine choke just 2 minutes into his heavyweight debut and captured the vacant UFC heavyweight championship at UFC 285. Jon Jones' return headlined a crazy card which also saw Alexa Grasso stun the world with a submission of Valentina Shevchenko, Shavkat Rakhmonov stake his claim as a welterweight contender, plus much more. Cyril Gane was no match for Jon Jones when the fight hit the canvas, which didn't take long, and tapped quickly when the former light heavyweight kingpin slapped on a guillotine choke against the fence.
This is just making him carry him. And he's putting pressure.
2 minutes 4 seconds into the first round, it was all over, making Jon Jones the heavyweight champ and reinforcing his status as the greatest of all time of MMA.
Referee Mark Otters called a stop to this contest at 2 minutes 4 seconds of the very first round, declaring the winner by submission due to a guillotine choke and UFC heavyweight undisputed champion of the world, Johnny
Now, you took no damage in this fight, and one of the conversations was about you fighting during International Fight Week in July and possibly fighting former champion Stipe Miocic. What do you think about that?
Oh, yeah, baby. Y'all want to see me beat up Stipe? One thing I know about the UFC is we give the fans what they want to see. Stipe Miocic, I hope you're training, my guy. You're the greatest heavyweight of all time, and that's what I want. I want you real bad.
Welcome back, and congratulations on achieving your goal.
Last thing.
The greatest of all time, ladies and gentlemen, Jon Jones!
And that brings us to the end of this edition of Lunchtime News here on TV1. For the Newsfirst team, I've been Sanita Senanayaka. Take care and stay safe.